Yo, what's up guys? Cygnus here, and today we're going to look at some methods to safely do red and black zone solo dungeons. First things first, let's take a look at the gear I like to bring. Now, I've had pretty high success with this build lately, and I'm sure I'll be crucified for choosing what I like, but here it goes. I bring a slightly modified version of the Great Axe build that I posted recently, mostly because it's efficient, and I like to get those sweet fame credits still. So my setup looks something like this. A T6 Great Axe for Raging Blades, Scholar Cowl for the mana capabilities, Stalker Jacket for more AoE damage, any plate boots for Wanderlust or demon boots for Vengeful Sprint, and an Undead Cape for the invisibility passive. I prefer cabbage soup and poisons or health potions. You can also bring invisibility pots and a fighting set if you would rather just fight the divers, and I'll cover that later. A couple quick notes about this build. It can kinda be a bitch fighting higher tier bosses with an undead cape due to obvious reasons. So if you pop your cape early, you better hope a diver doesn't engage you in the next 2 minutes or so. For this reason, you could bring health potions to keep yourself from hitting 25%, because that's technically your new 0. Next, we're going to cover some precautions I like to take while soloing. Bubble mechanics. A frequently overlooked mechanic in the game that you should not forget about. Your bubble is your first line of defense when entering and exiting a dungeon. When you first enter a dungeon, you'll have a bubble, a debuff timer, and cooldowns on your abilities. If you run inside the dungeon too far, the bubble will drop and you won't be able to use your abilities because of the cooldown. I tend to zone in and wait a little bit before I move, even if I think the dungeon is completely safe. Make sure if you run into a dungeon and find it cleared, you wait before exiting. That way you'll be able to mount up safely and get away. The same goes for entering a new dungeon. If you A out because it was cleared, wait until the cooldown is up on your bubble before entering another one. This can be a little bit time consuming, especially if there's another dungeon that spawns right next to the one you were just in, but generally in these more dangerous areas, it's harder to find solos. Next is paying attention to the hostile counter. This is only in red zones and it tends to give you a false sense of security. You may feel safe if you constantly see that number at 0, but any experienced diver knows that you can enter dungeon as blue, wait until you see the person doing the dungeon, moving off screen a little bit, and immediately flagging. This doesn't give them much time to respond before you're on top of them. This next one's pretty straightforward. Edge watching. I couldn't think of what else to call this. You should be constantly checking the edge of your screen from the direction that you just came from. Don't clear the first pack of enemies. This can be a bit of a double-edged sword. You want to give the enemy diver enough of a reason to turn back so they don't figure out that you're in the dungeon. But here's the kicker. If you leave too many and get a single floor dungeon, you're at a loss unless you want to go back and clear them all so that the chest is unlocked. I usually don't bother with it if it's a lower rarity chest. Some people will expand on that last precaution and take it to another level, literally, by skipping the entire first floor. I'm really not a fan of this method because my luck, I'll run all the way through just to figure out it's a single floor dungeon and then I wasted all that time. I mean, if you're really tired of getting ganked, it might be worth it for you. Alright, now we're going to talk about some engagement options. I'll cover my preference first and then we'll talk about some other options. Since I like to run an undead cape and demon boots, I usually try to see how many there are, inspect them to see if I'm outmatched in IP or dealing with a hunter hood or something that's good at kiting. Then I usually try to fight them until I'm at least at 25%. My undead cape procs and I demon boot the hell out of there. This method gives me a chance to defend myself and try to get some possible loot in the process. Now this method may be okay for 1v1, but in general I've noticed 2, 3, and even 4 person dive squads rolling around. If that's the case, you kinda have to remember where exactly you're at in the dungeon. If you're closer to the beginning, try not to engage or attack any of them so that you're not put in combat and can actually zone out. If you're pretty far away, or for example at the boss, you can always try to put up a fight there, then create distance with your demon boots when your undead cape procs. Then once you think you've gotten far enough away, you can always A out. Because remember, you can't zone through when you're in combat. Remember how at the beginning I mentioned invis pots and swap sets? Another viable option is running into the mobs you haven't cleared yet, getting to a safe spot, popping an invisibility potion, and swapping your gear. Keep in mind though, when you swap each piece of gear, a cooldown starts on all of your abilities. This method can give you an advantage by allowing you to switch to better fighting gear, allowing you to drop aggro and regen some health, and hopefully get the mobs to aggro onto the diver. Another quick note about the invis pots is that any damage taken or abilities used will break the invisibility. That includes bleeds, AoEs, projectiles, and poisons. Well, that's all I've got. I hope this video has been useful and prepares you for dungeons in the red and black zones. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for future content. Thanks again for watching, and check out my Patreon. Peace!